before gold shined, before coins rang, before paper promised value, humanity paid with what it could touch: stones, shells, salt, objects that today feel ordinary, even worthless, once carried power, survival, and trust. This is not just the story of strange old currencies. This is the story of how humans learned what money really is, because long before money had numbers, it had meaning. A world without money. Imagine waking up in a world with no prices, no salaries, no bank accounts, no coins in your pocket. If you wanted food, you had to offer something of equal value. If you wanted tools, you needed something the other person wanted. This system, barter, worked only when societies were small. But as villages grew into towns, and towns into civilizations, barter began to fail. What if the farmer didn't want your pottery? What if the hunter already had enough grain? What if value couldn't be agreed upon? Humanity needed a middle object, something everyone accepted. Not money, trust, stones. The weight of agreement, one of the earliest solutions, was stone. Not just any stone, special stones. In some societies, massive carved stones represented wealth. In others, small polished stones passed hand to hand. The most famous example comes from the island of Yap, where giant stone discs, some weighing tons, were used as money. They didn't move. Ownership changed through agreement. Everyone remembered who owned which stone. The stone itself mattered less than the collective belief surrounding it. And that's the lesson stones taught humanity. Money doesn't need to move. It needs to be recognized. Why stones worked? Stones were durable. They didn't rot. They didn't disappear. Their effort to produce gave them value. Carving, transporting, all required labor. And labor, even then, was value. But stones had a problem. They were heavy, impractical, local. Stones could not travel with expanding trade. Civilizations needed something lighter, something beautiful, something symbolic. Shells, and to the story, shells didn't just appear as currency. They were chosen. Cowrie shells, especially, became one of the most widespread currencies in history. From Africa to Asia, from islands to inland markets, shells traveled farther than armies. They were lightweight, durable, difficult to counterfeit, naturally limited, and most importantly, widely desired. Shells were decorative, spiritual, status symbols. They blended beauty with utility. For the first time, money didn't just store value, it expressed identity. When shells ruled economies in parts of Africa and Asia, shells were used to pay wages, buy land, set dowries, settle debts. Entire economies ran on shells. But shells carried a hidden weakness: supply. Once trade routes expanded, shells flooded markets. European traders brought shiploads of shells to Africa. What was once rare became common, and value collapsed. This was one of the earliest lessons in inflation. Shells taught humanity something brutal. Money loses power when trust is broken by excess. Salt, the currency of survival. Then there was salt, not decorative, not symbolic, essential. Salt preserved food, sustained life, prevented death. In ancient worlds without refrigeration, salt was survival. It was so valuable that soldiers were sometimes paid in salt. The word salary still carries that memory. Salt became money not because it was beautiful, but because it was necessary. Why salt was trusted? Salt was divisible, consumable, essential, universally needed. It crossed social classes. The rich needed it. The poor needed it. Armies needed it. Empires depended on it. Where salt routes existed, power followed. Cities rose around salt mines. Wars were fought over salt control. Salt didn't just flavor food, it flavored history. The limits of salt, but salt had a fatal flaw. It dissolved. It could be consumed. It could disappear. A currency that vanishes when used is unstable. As trade expanded and wealth needed storage, salt failed. Humanity was learning. Every currency taught a lesson and then stepped aside. What these currencies had in common: stones, shells, salt. They were different, but they shared something crucial. They were not money by law. They were money by acceptance. No king declared them currency. No government enforced them. People agreed. That agreement, repeated thousands of times, created value. This is the foundation of all money. The evolution of trust. Each material solved a problem and exposed another. Stones solved durability. Shells solved portability. Salt solved necessity, but none solved everything. Humanity wasn't just searching for money. It was searching for perfect trust. Trade makes currency compete. As civilizations interacted, currencies competed. Shells met metals. Salt met silver. Stones met gold. And slowly, markets chose winners, not morally, not politically, practically. Currencies that traveled better survived. Currencies that stored value longer dominated. Currencies that resisted manipulation endured. The quiet exit of primitive money. Stones didn't disappear overnight. Shells didn't vanish instantly. Salt remained valuable long after it stopped being money. But their role changed. They stopped being standards and became goods. That transition marks the birth of true money. The hidden legacy. Even today, modern money carries their DNA. Stones taught us that money is belief. Shells taught us that money is acceptance. Salt taught us that money is necessity. Digital currency still depends on these truths. Screens replaced shells. Servers replaced stones. Energy replaced salt. But the idea is unchanged. Money was never about objects. This is the greatest misunderstanding. Money was never about what it was made of. It was about what people agreed it represented. Stones, shells, salt. They were stepping stones, not failures. They were experiments. And every experiment brought humanity closer to understanding value. Final reflection. Before money became numbers, before banks existed, before gold shined, humanity trusted what it could see, feel, and need. Stones anchored belief. Shells carried beauty. Salt preserved life. They didn't just buy goods, they built civilization. And though they no longer sit in our pockets, their lesson remains. Money is not paper. Money is not metal. Money is shared trust, frozen into form. And that trust began with stones, shells, and salt.